Hey, AfterBuzzers, you are checking out OJ Made in America, ESPN's 30 for 30, episodes 2 and 3.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Hey there, thank you for joining us. You are checking out OJ Made in America. As we said, episodes 2 and 3, we are cramming in 4 hours of footage into an hour for you. I know that you've been watching the documentaries. If you're like us, you are as addicted to it as possible. I am Jill Munro. You can catch me on all social media at Stiletto Jill, and also make sure you're following AfterBuzz. To my left are my co-hosts Gabriel, Josh, and Michael. Please introduce yourself to the people.
Hey fans, you can catch me all the time on Twitter at Double G on TV.
I'm Josh Rodriguez. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Josh_Rodriguez_.
What's up, everybody? I'm Michael Rippe. You can catch me all over social media at Mike Rips, MikeRips.
So, now that you have met the panel, we have to jump right in because there's a lot to cover. So, episodes 2 and 3 sort of brought us to the point of OJ's career, the later years, his last years in Buffalo and then on to San Francisco, and also his relationship with Nicole. When we left off in episode 1, we were just meeting Nicole, right?
Yes.
And she was 18 years old, a waitress at the Daisy in Beverly Hills, and that's where OJ met her, immediately knew that he wanted to marry her. We got the details of a rough first date, and now we're here. They have been dating. OJ is on the twilight end of his football career and plunging head first into his acting career. And we're also looking at the same time, the city of Los Angeles. And while OJ is moving further away from the community and the issues that are taking place there, in South LA, there is much strife between the people of the city and the LAPD. So, where should we start, guys? There's so much to talk about. So much to talk about. Let's start with OJ and Nicole and the development of their relationship. For me, I thought it was interesting. I think that we talked about at the end of episode 1, mentioned that OJ and his first wife, Marguerite, lost a child and how difficult that was on their relationship. Obviously, OJ and Nicole hooked up before his marriage with Marguerite was finished. And he became a very different person with Nicole. So from their early beginnings through what we saw, how do you feel about their relationship and what we were introduced to, the tender side, I guess?
Well, it definitely seems like it's a very passionate relationship, and you sense that right from the start with their first date. So you can tell that it's probably roller coastery, high highs, low lows. You know, they got aggressive on the first date, which, you know, that means that they must have been so passionate, and so that's the one thing.
That's a word.
You know.
Well, I think that it's very important to note just how compartmentalized that OJ was. I love the stories that we have from Nicole's friend Robin Greer, and also a friend of OJ at the time. Similar to how Joe Bell his input was so crucial in parts 1. I think she was the star part 2 in her insight, and that's what makes this 30 for 30 so amazing. Like we talked about the new material. The fact that she brought it up and she said it so perfectly, that he was so compartmentalized that he tied so much of his pain and so many emotions to Marguerite, and the fact that he was able to be a very different person with Nicole was very interesting to learn about, and I think it really adds a lot to the character and understanding him and understanding how it started to unravel later on.
Yeah.
I found the most interesting part when his daughter died, how he was able to close the chapter on not just his daughter, but Marguerite as well. That kind of took me back, wow, he was able to actually move on from his daughter and a relationship and use that to move on to Nicole.
For me, what it felt like is that he had already moved on from Marguerite and used that as an excuse to
kind of weird,
propel himself into his relationship with Nicole, and a very controlling relationship.
Right.
I mean, in episode 1, there was discussed how 2 weeks after their first date, he was getting an apartment for Nicole, who was 18 years old and in college, had just graduated high school, and a car, and like, I don't want you to go to school anymore. So there definitely was something about her that drove him in a very different direction.
Yeah.
And it came at a perfect time because he was ending his career. And as I think he said in his Hall of Fame speech, Nicole, for him, helped transition. He said he learned early on, those first 3 years in Buffalo, how he knew that he was going to be a mess without football, that he would have to have something to funnel his time in. And I think that's when he made the decision that Hollywood and acting and where I can get that constant attention is going to be it. And somehow she fed into that.
I also thought that from part 1 through part 2 and 3, we can clearly see the evolution of OJ as a human. I mean, I was saying after part 1, there were so many scenes and footage of him as a young man that I thought he was, charming, kind of a lot more humble, had a humility to him, at least that I had seen from part 1. And in part 2 and 3, you start to see the transition from that character to a more aggressive, loud, outspoken, he's got years on him, and you start to see how he's kind of changing.
So let's kind of step back then and take a look at the city of Los Angeles and what's happening with it at the same time. The documentary talked about in 1979, there was a woman in South LA, actually in Watts, Eula Love, who was shot 8 times over a delinquent gas bill. And it just kicked off a series of murders and unrest in South LA, with police going into apartments and homes and just destroying the home, looking for drugs, small amounts of ounces and things like that. Meanwhile, over in Brentwood and those areas, they have no idea that this is happening to people. They can't imagine that something like this, the police would do something like this. I remember growing up here in the 80s, there was even, because there were tanks that would go into those neighborhoods to break down the doors, and there was a rapper that had a song called The Batarang. I mean, it just, looking at that footage was terrifying. You can't imagine being at war, and that's essentially what it looked like. The thing that was interesting to me that I forgot, that I didn't realize, is during that time period, LA actually had a black mayor that had been in place for 12 years, like through all of the Daryl Gates, who was the police chief, who followed the first one who sort of set the military order for LAPD and the standard to take no prisoners. LA still had a black mayor. So it's kind of interesting that there was this much going on within the community when at the top ranks of the city, they were represented in theory. So I know that's a mouthful. What do you guys think of all of that? I mean, it's just so much.
Definitely. For someone who doesn't remember well those days, and really I've only ever seen sparing images as far as on television, and, because it is brought up, you do learn about these things. For myself, seeing that, I think it really is very startling, and it's very different to see, to know the world was very different back then. And I think one of the parts of 30 for 30, as I understand this episode, they bring out parallels. There are supposed to be things you notice that, we still struggle with a few things, issues. It's no secret that there are areas in the United States still struggling to have cohesion and fair judgment with their local police department. So I thought having that, it was very, very informative, very insightful, and it really...
A lot of Ferguson parallels almost, if you think about it. Yeah.
That's where I was going to say.
So much of Baltimore.
There's a lot of parallels, not just Baltimore, but especially right now in the type of age and climate that we're living in, that you can look at the part 2 and 3 and start to see, man, this stuff was going on then, and we're starting to see a lot of it kind of go on right now in our times.
And it's crazy for me, just speaking personally. I knew of the Rodney King incident, but I wasn't old enough to actually understand what happened during that incident, and I wasn't old enough to even remember the cases that they discussed before, like the case you just mentioned. I forgot the woman's name when she was shot in the back of the head.
Latasha Harlins was a teenage girl that was shot in the back of the head by a Korean grocer who received 5 months probation for the murder. So as you can see, it sets up to show that the city of Los Angeles, especially in South LA, was really fed up with LAPD seemingly not taking Black Lives Matter, sort of seeing that in reverse at that time period, not valuing the lives of these community members.
And I thought there was an interesting quote. I have it here. I forgot who said it, but he said that racism is not the Korean killing her, but racism is the court system that allows her to kill her.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was an awesome quote.
Yes,
there was also the footage when the riots began of the truck driver that they dragged
Reginald
out.
Denny.
Yeah.
Reginald Denny,
That was crazy.
That was terrible.
I remember
the footage from the Korean in the grocery store, and then the same thing. Some of the footage, I can't believe that it's like I don't know if it's because I've never seen it or where it's been, but I don't feel like it's been as public, some of this footage,
I
to
think
all of
that
us.
It was public, but the idea is in 1989, 1990, it was regional news. It was local news. It wasn't on the 24/7 news cycle that we're currently in, so it may not have traveled to other areas of the country with the same intensity. I remember the riots. I remember being a kid and going out like with my friends, like we're gonna go ride around and see what this is. And I've obviously never seen any military action or things like that, but that is exactly what the city felt like. So let's bring it back around to OJ, what's happening with him in this time. He and Nicole got married in 1985. They had their first daughter soon after. And now we start to see a change in their relationship. When we start to hear about OJ is still a philanderer. He is still out in those streets, as most professional athletes of that time were known to do. He's partying. He's going to all-white golf clubs, getting accused of cheating at golf, which is a great
That was-
And they
impression.
said he wasn't trying to hide it either. He
The
was very
best part
brazen
is
about it.
they had the golf cart that followed him called the Juice Patrol. That was
crazy.
incredible. Like
That
the
was funny.
detail is so great.
What they called the OJ?
They called it the Juice Patrol.
Yeah, Juice
the
Patrol.
golf cart that would follow him because it was so obvious that it was cheating. Like that was amazing. The one time where he just put it on a tee.
Yeah.
Like in the.
Who does that? How does that happen? Who explains that and thinks that that is logical?
Right.
But you know what that goes to? OJ thinking that he can
get
talk
away-
away, talk his
Yes.
way out of everything. That's a
Right.
reoccurring
And
thing.
it shows you, it's kind of foreshadowing. It shows you his character. He thinks he's above anything at this point. He can just get away with it. And golf, it's supposed to be a gentleman's game, and he's trying to get away with it. That's
true.
So that was some incredible footage.
They explained it very well that the thing about golf is that you're proud if you know how to play it.
Right.
Yes, that's the whole point that so many people get into it, despite the fact that it's a slow game. It's the fact that when you play, when you get your clubs and you're looking at the green, a lot of people think it's easy. It's not, so that's why they're proud of it. But I think this point also illustrates something, the growing change in OJ as far as maybe not being able to put up so many appearances. You know, if he was truly committed to blending in, so to speak, I feel like, would he have taken golf more seriously? That's one of my biggest questions.
I mean, I think you have to look at OJ's age. What
Right.
we kind of skate over is the fact that OJ was 12 years older than Nicole when they met. So by this point, 5-7 years later, he's mid-30s. He's a businessman. A lot of business deals happen on the golf course.
Right.
So, and with his competitive edge, he's, doing a bunch of different, he's doing his OJ, which we saw, he felt like his face was the ticket to get him into anything that he desired, no matter what. And we see how that played out in his home life with Nicole, where they obviously had a very passionate and loving and fun relationship.
Well, they went to the wedding, and his
Yes.
wedding speech was really nice. I really enjoyed the scenes from his wedding. He looked so happy. They talked about how happy he was at the wedding. They talked about how the house, everybody wanted to come over to their house. From athletes, it was the place to be.
Yeah.
So their relationship, early relationship time, was great, and through the wedding scenes, but then it started to deteriorate and change.
And one of the first things that Nicole mentioned, one of the earliest things that happened is that she was pregnant and her appearance changed. Pregnant women gain weight. And for OJ, that was an extreme issue.
Yeah.
And it was interesting as I was watching, I wondered, well, what happened to his first wife, Marguerite? You never hear anything about her. I wondered if they had the same sort of domestic issues. So I looked it up, and in 1995, during the trial, she did one interview with Barbara Walters. And she said if OJ had ever tried to put his hands on her, he would have got hit upside the head with a frying pan. She said he never touched her. There were never reports of police activity. So that just goes to show you, usually they say that abusers have a pattern, but in this instance, it appears that whatever happened started with Nicole.
So she didn't say anything about emotional abuse, physical?
No, as a matter of fact, he accused her of physical and
Really?
emotional abuse during their divorce trial. And obviously, towards the end, there was over money, but
Right.
eventually they settled, and that was it. She went on and lived a quiet life away from the spotlight.
Wow.
Well, I think it has to go to some degree to talk about Nicole's psyche then as a female, maybe because she was younger than OJ, maybe she wasn't very experienced with many men or serious relationships. because clearly it was a pattern that OJ was abusing her. And I guess at the start, she never stood up for herself or kind of put her hand up and said, you can't do that. Where maybe Marguerite just laid it on him straight on, like, you can't do that. And she was stronger, and maybe Nicole just wasn't strong enough. And so OJ could get away with it once, he could get away with it twice, and so on. Because at one point, when we see the scene where she calls the police, she said it was like the 8th time. It's happened eight times.
Right.
I mean,
which is crazy. And that's that 8 times you call, so it's happened.
8 times people she called and the police came out, and you saw pictures from some of those times where she was clearly bruised and swelling and swollen. And you understand that athletes and celebrity are extended a certain amount of privilege, which, if you think about it, everyone wants to be extended the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Everyone has had a time when they've messed up and, it was a one-off. They don't want it to ruin everything. And there are people that help you, and you thank those people for giving you a chance. But with OJ, it was, a sickness. He used people to manipulate them, and he knew just how to do it with his charm and his smile.
Well, I think that speaks to several different things. So one of the things we discuss is the psyche, and it's discussed that OJ had a problem. We know about his father being gay and how that affected OJ, and we mentioned it in the documentary when it comes up later, I believe with his children or someone watching the kids.
His son, Nicole sat with his son next to a gay man, and OJ freaked out when they were away.
Exactly. Things like that. It shows that as well as he was hiding things, I love the term they used in episode 1, this superficial pleasantness. There was always something underlying, and as he got older, we see the rising tension. I think it's also important to note that Nicole, yes, 18, young, she relied on OJ for everything. There's a reason she was a waitress at the Daisy, not necessarily a part owner.
Here's the thing, though.
Yeah,
she was 18, but her parents were, certainly not OJ established, but they were definitely somewhat established. The thing that is interesting that I found once she got further into the relationship, OJ was taking care of her whole family.
Yes.
His father had a Hertz ownership. He paid for one of her sisters to go to college at USC. So there's so many different things that are layered into her staying together, besides not just her immediate family and those children, but her extended family.
Well, I've heard, this is where I'm going to go back to the abuse for a little bit. It didn't happen with Marguerite, so that we know of, right? So it starts happening with Nicole. Now, football players, I don't know if you know this, but the NFL's under investigation with
CTE.
concussion. Yeah,
Yes.
CTE. A lot of people think that he had CTE. Maybe he didn't have it with Marguerite, and maybe he developed it later with Nicole and just got worse and worse and worse. I think that looks like more of the pattern to me than he was abusive all his life. And
that makes a lot of sense.
All of a sudden just started becoming abusive with Nicole.
But do you think also there were accusations of drug use? Obviously, I don't know if you saw, in the wedding video, someone was like, where's the drugs at their wedding? Their house was obviously the party spot. So certainly alcohol and drug
jealousy. He was a jealous person, and I'm not diagnosing him with CT. I'm just opening it up as a possibility.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I would not be surprised given the number of players who had domestic violence issues, and once
Junior
they passed
Seau
on,
killed himself, suicide.
There's been
the football player from Kansas City,
number of players.
Tyler Sash.
We could go on and on about the players. Absolutely, I think that's a clear, great point about the CTE, and also. There was a quote about his jealousy. They said he was as jealous as he was good at football.
Wow.
Which is pretty deep. Bringing it back to football, it brought up an interesting point. We're introduced to his relationship with Marcus Allen, who was a running back at USC, much in the mode of OJ. He's OJ, 2.0, essentially. OJ. And OJ took him under his wing. I guess they acted together on that First and 10 show that used to be on HBO, and generally were friends. And what we learn as Nicole gains her independence and is tired of OJ's cheating ways and just growing as a woman, and as she starts to leave, they went through several separations. 1989, I believe, was the year when New Year's Eve, the most explosive altercation happened between the two of them, where the police officer came and Nicole came out of the bushes and
he escaped in his Bentley.
Yeah, he's getting away. The police officer's report on that, he even said in it, he believed that OJ would kill her. The fact that there's no link to the other 7 times that this happened, to me, is a bigger issue, with that police department, and sort of shows the the opposite ends of the spectrum between what's going on with the privilege and what happens in South LA. Those people aren't given the benefit of the doubt. And OJ is overextended that privilege.
Given way more than the benefit of the doubt. Just given the keys, go do whatever you want, pretty much.
And it was a cool quote. Guy said, "Celebrity transcends race and color."
Absolutely.
I thought that was an awesome quote,
and it's really true. We also, learn more about his relationship with AC Cowlings, which I have to be honest, very peculiar friendship.
Yeah.
Very peculiar friendship. And it also makes me think about OJ's father.
Yes.
And are there other things
Yes.
that bonded OJ and AC
I
together?
didn't want to say it to be funny, but I think, it is a possibility, especially the way he acts. Not OJ.
AC
the
acts.
way
I
AC
mean, you're
acts.
buying
It's-
matching cars.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that was always so puzzling to me. AC drove the getaway car, but he also is speaking at Nicole's memorial service. It's just...
It's weird.
It's a lot.
It's
It's too
weird.
much.
I think it speaks to definitely an issue. Exactly what I'm not a physician or psychiatrist to say, but I do believe it's easy to determine that he was very obsessed with OJ on a level that you would not categorize as normal.
Right. And
At
this was
all.
before he was famous, too.
Yes.
This was always.
Since they were in high school.
That-
I mean, they
that
told the
story-
story about him stepping in front of the gun. He
Right.
was going to take a bullet for OJ.
Yeah.
Look, I know that they're ride or die homies, but explain to me what he had done for you at that point.
Right.
That you're willing to take a bullet for him.
And you could even justify that, but you can't justify still being friends with him after he steals your girlfriend.
Exactly.
And then marries that girlfriend. And
Exactly.
then has kids with that girlfriend.
Exactly. The whole thing. And then leaves her.
Yeah. I can't. I don't care who you are.
So, kind of going back to Marcus Allen for a second, we learned that Marcus and OJ had a tight friendship, and eventually Marcus and Nicole had an interesting relationship where they began sleeping together. It wasn't really clear to me if they were in an actual relationship or if it was just, I know Marcus was married at the time, so if
I
it
get
was
the
just
feeling
kind of
it was a
revenge.
fling.
It's
A fling
unlike
thing.
a
I felt it was a
benefits
fling.
type of thing.
It was a fling.
They kind
That's
of
how I
were
put it.
probably friendly to begin with, and that led to just some more, but I didn't think it was really like official.
Do you know what I
Keep in
found the most interesting about this? OJ still let Marcus get married at his house after he found out about that affair. It's
interesting.
It's just so many weird things.
It kind of feels like with OJ at this point too that he's kind of just depends the day, the time of the day, which OJ you're gonna get.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
You might get the OJ that's the charmer, he's good to go, and then by night he's about to attack, and it just depends what day you're on with him. He could be hot or cold really quickly.
Yeah.
Speaking to that, I felt like it was OJ playing an angle when I saw that with Marcus, because when I think about it, he's getting to that point where he's maybe not as connected with the younger athletes coming up. Marcus was his tie to say that, hey, still being a part of this world in the NFL, because he'd done his steps to distance himself. It's said he wasn't the best commentator. He had the deal, but he did receive a lot of criticism. He was focusing on his entertainment career. So I feel like his relationship with Marcus, it was just OJ playing another card.
I also kind of think that OJ might have been a little jealous of Marcus.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And so to kind of
he
maybe
saw himself, his younger self,
And-
that
right,
got
a
away
better-
from him.
a better
Yes,
self.
yeah.
and because the younger thing, maybe you're living in the past a little bit, and I think he probably wanted to keep Marcus a little close, or kind of have a little
Keep your
control.
enemies close.
Right, have a little control over the situation. And that's kind of where I felt on that.
We also learn about the extent of OJ's jealousy when we learn about OJ being in the bushes outside of Nicole's home, watching her and her boyfriend at the time having relations. So, I mean, you have to really think about the psychology of a person that is going to sit there and watch you and then come back the next day to confront you. I mean,
Well, definitely the accounts by Keith Zlomsowicz. I hope I said that right, Keith Z. I felt they were very chilling. When you when you hear just the extent of OJ's jealousy, the physicality, the amount of terror he tried to put in Nicole, I thought that was that was just phenomenal content that I don't think people have seen in a long time.
Right.
And he even mentioned Keith did. He said OJ came in, but he wanted to talk to Nicole separately. Yeah. He could hear them loud, and then when he walked out, he shook his hand like it was all like normal or cool.
And he said he flipped the switch. He was that OJ.
Crazy.
You know,
that's a sign of a psychopath.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, he or a sociopath.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Yeah.
Just flipping it up, you know, at any given moment and just regaining that smile. So, I think that we can head into episode 3 now.
Yeah.
Ready? We did pretty good. All right.
If we missed something, let us know in the comments.
Please
Absolutely.
let us know.
Yes.
Catch it.
Absolutely.
Because it is a huge episode, and it
is.
sparked so much discussion on social media. I think that thank you to everyone who's watching, because we've gotten so many views, and I think it's because everyone wants to get in on this conversation.
It's riveting.
Yes.
It's really riveting stuff that everybody can watch and feel a part of and kind of understand, think about where they were, their family, how it relates to everyone. It's
definitely.
So moving into episode 3, which sort of gets us ready for the trial and the events leading up to the murders and the arrest. One thing that I found interesting that we learned was OJ's punishment for the New Year's Eve event. He basically got to coordinate a golf tournament, 120 hours of community service. He also did that horrible interview with Roy Firestone, who was flamed on social media about the softball questions he threw at OJ in that interview, where he sort of just once again shrugged off the incident and just sort of left it up as a night of too much drinking and a little out of control, when now we know, seeing those photos, that it was actually much more brutal than that. I was
just going to mention that I think that speaks to, yes, his preferential treatment, they mentioned that, but also how in the pockets he had the LAPD, at least through Ron Shipp. There's no question that he did cultivate a relationship that did garner him a pass. But
here's the thing that I think about that. He garnered a relationship that adhered them even more, but at the same time, what did they talk about? One thing that you know is that, what's the quote that you said again, Josh?
Celebrity transcends race or color.
And I think that you will find that a reoccurring theme in no matter what we're talking about, people want to be close to other successful people.
Yes.
And so for those cops, even if they didn't necessarily have that buddy relationship with OJ, they probably would have wanted to. So it
felt like a moment in the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you said a great point in part 1, and he even mentioned it in part 2. I didn't quickly mention it, but he said you are judged on your abilities. So it didn't matter, any skin color or whatnot. It's just you're judging your abilities. And you said that last week. I wanted to mention that.
So as we head into episode 3, we start building up. We obviously know that OJ and Nicole at this point are separated, that Nicole is dating and for the first time really enjoying her life as a young woman, because she's never had that. She's been with OJ from her late teens, all of her 20s, and now she is enjoying herself, going out with friends and trying to free herself from the former life with him. But we all know he's very, very controlling. So they had a dance recital for Sydney that the entire family went to that night, and then there was a dinner afterwards. And Nicole's mother left her glasses at the restaurant, and we kind of know what happens from there, and everything that's going on. What I wanted to ask you guys about is that there is a book that was written by William Deere that came out a couple of years ago that presented an alternate theory. Because one thing that people have always talked about is if OJ didn't do it and all of that evidence, who could have? And it brings up OJ's son, Jason, who had military training and some psychological issues, and presents a bunch of different theories of how it, could have been him or so forth. As we went through the trial, the pieces leading up to, Mark Furman, which we can all talk about all day, and all the botched moves. Side note, the star of episode 3, if we pick one for each one, was definitely Carl Douglas, the prosecutor, the defense attorney. He had
a couple Carl Douglas stories.
But from your perspective, what in that episode, because it was so many things, it was the trial, it was the Bronco chase, it was, OJ once again saying, I'm OJ, I'm not black, the fans that were waiting outside that was like a parade. The Bronco chase, when you think about it, LA is big on high-speed chases, we know, helicopters. That was a parade procession. So
And he was in control completely of it.
Complete control. So talk a little bit about your thoughts on sort of that time, then, what you might have felt from now.
Well, go ahead. Yeah. I was just going to say, when I look at that, I think it speaks to very much the magnitude of OJ's celebrity just in Los Angeles. The fact that they said this wasn't a chase, this was an escort to his house.
So it seemed, yeah.
Yes, but more than that, I think it's going into it. When we look at the case, when we break it down, the fact that it's this beautifully shot merging of this incredible character as far as, parts of his psyche, parts of his celebrity, just his personality, and now combined with the climate of the time, it made for a story that's just completely unique. And I think that's why even now, but even back then, it just captured the nation's attention.
It was the perfect storm of everything.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at the OJ case. It was just a perfect storm of celebrity, racial issues, just sports, everything you can think of that America loves and defines America. It was just a perfect storm.
And it also, for me, I feel it began the TMZ-ation, that's not even a word, but the TMZ-ation, so to speak, of news and, 24/7 coverage,
Yeah.
but from the sensationalized angle, because that trial, as we saw, took off a major, daytime soap operas and afternoon shows, and everyone was tuned in. I believe they said at its peak, 150 million people were watched the OJ trial throughout those months of
and even before the trial, I interrupted my Knicks Rockets game.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm a huge Knicks fan.
That anniversary is tomorrow, 22 years.
I didn't know. The first thing I thought was it was very riveting, but there was two things, and I don't know why I thought them, but I thought that Kato Kalin was so oblivious that he was just in his back house. He thought OJ was in Chicago, and then he mistook the murder for the earthquake or like the banging on the
It
walls.
was almost suspicious, right?
An earthquake?
Yeah.
Like, what was he doing? Was he on drugs?
Drugs.
Yeah.
Like, so
Lots
high
of
that
drugs.
he thought it was an
Yeah.
earthquake?
They portrayed
Drugs.
They portrayed Kato
He didn't
very
even,
well.
like, come out to look, or he just...
Drugs.
crazy.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, really.
It was portrayed
Drugs.
very well in the dramatization, The People versus O.J.
Yeah.
Simpson, which is that was another great piece, about this time.
Yeah.
Kato Kalin was very
Oblivious to
yes.
things.
He had recreational reasons why he was so oblivious.
Also, I had a question because they talked about how OJ stopped for McDonald's, but I wonder what did he order at McDonald's that night?
Fries and nuggets. I don't know.
I know it's random. I don't know why my brain went there, but I was like, I wonder what that was like the last thing he ate before he comes home and he basically commits the murder. So I was just like, what did he get from McDonald's? Like, what set him off? Was it like he just got a bad Big Mac and then he's like, this is it, or
whatever it is? I'm 90% sure he supersized it.
That the timeline of the murders was always intriguing to me because it was about 15 minutes that they say, OJ got to Nicole's house. The brutality of those murders. We know Ron Goldman fought for his life and ultimately did not make it. We know the brutality of the murders. Nicole was almost severed at her head. And then he made it home. And I know that there was a lot of blood evidence. Something that I discovered that this trial was the first and only murder trial that Marsha Clark lost.
Really?
So
I didn't know that.
It was, and she said that this trial had an abundance of evidence more than any other trial she had tried before.
Yeah.
So I just thought that really goes to show how your team, because ultimately they were out-legaled, if you just want to come down to it.
Absolutely.
And I feel like even in 20-something years later, Marsha can't let go of that. She can't just acknowledge that. Just, they were out.
I can understand that. They do a great job. Marsha Clark provided a great account of her side of the story, and the thing is, they portrayed it very well. She was the person for the job for the district attorney to say, hey, this is the attorney who's going to get this guy who brutally killed them. It doesn't matter that he is O.J. Simpson. She didn't care about that.
She had tried Hollywood trials before. There was an actress named Rebecca Schaefer that was murdered by a stalker, and she, got him locked away. So her proximity to celebrity as far as court cases wasn't absent. Although I did find it interesting that she said she didn't know who O.J. was, but she knew he was washed up. The math is kind of
I'm 90% sure, in the time since then, I feel like she learned, but I also think it's very noticeable to add that in terms of the case, the climate of the time, it is as much a part of OJ's defense as his dream team with Johnny Cochran. On a side note, How unique does it have to be that your lawyer became famous defending you? I mean, we just don't see that today. At least I can't think of
You
it.
talking about Cochran? You're talking about?
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
the-
No,
You
Cochran
were-
was,
Cochran was
no,
already
Cochran
famous.
was already
Yeah, he was
famous.
already
He was,
famous.
Yes.
he was in LA. That was.
Well, his profile grows so much. Put
I mean,
that way.
obviously it grew a lot, but he was really beloved in Los Angeles, and those were the issues that he was fighting day in and day out. Those issues of, civil rights for victims behind the police, and those different charges. So he very much was in the community, and in theory, going with that defense, it only made sense to pick up Cochran. But obviously, the irony is that OJ never considered himself black.
Right.
But as the elders say, chickens always come home to roost, and you will quickly remember who you are. You can't run away from something like that.
Also, of course, this was another area where we see OJ benefiting from the cops, because we can say he got the legal teams won and whatnot, but the questioning that the cops did to OJ when they brought him in was so awful.
Softball, yeah.
Yes.
It was, I mean, it seemed like, come on, from every step. And even when you look at Mark Furman made major mistakes that allowed the openings for the legal team to come in.
See, I
down
think
the road.
that if you think about the entire case, from the prosecution to the officer, I think that there was an arrogance with the way that they handled things. Even Marsha Clark, in thinking, black women like me. Why do you think that? I mean, and I'm not saying that they wouldn't, but just sort of. And
Right.
I understand their approach. They had a lot of evidence and they were confident, but you're dealing with the best legal team that money can buy. And I feel like that should have weighed on them a little bit more. That F. Lee Bailey, he solved big cases in the 70s. So
I think part of it, not so much the prosecution, because if it was complacent, when you think about it, this is the first time Marsha Clark didn't get that vote. As we said, she'd won a lot of cases. She was leaning on what she knew. That lends to how unique this court case was. Added into that, the jury selection.
Yeah,
I thought it was very brilliant that they added the fact that the demographic that they wanted for their jury, they just couldn't get because they simply weren't available to be sequestered for 6 months.
Right.
Whereas the selection that favored the defense, they were available, and that is a big part of it.
I think it was more important. Like, she was more worried about that than she let us on.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Because
believe so.
I'm not sure if it was her who said it, but it was a stat saying that 10% of blacks thought it was likely that OJ was guilty. Only 10% of them. So if you have 8 jurors who are black,
Your odds, yeah.
you know what I mean? So I think they were more worried about that than they let on.
And I also think that more than likely, I think that they didn't expect the case to, sort of stay where it was. We had seen the Rodney
Right.
King case move to Simi Valley. They were hoping maybe Santa Monica. It would have been a vastly different case. What I didn't like was the implication by Gil Garcetti and Marsha Clark that the jurors weren't smart enough to get it. I think
That killed from the start. Set the wrong tone for
it
the prosecution.
set the tone, yeah.
And then Johnny Cochran's rebuttal to it was perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that set the tone for the whole case, to be honest with you.
One thing to note is that Ron Shipp, who was with the LAPD and OJ's friend, he wasn't with it anymore that day after OJ flew back from Chicago.
Yeah.
He immediately noticed the differences in OJ's alibi and for whatever reason was like,
Nope.
not
This is the guy
rolling.
who kills somebody.
all the
Yeah.
different versions of the cutting of his finger
Yeah.
that he was
Yeah.
telling.
So I thought that, it was interesting that everybody didn't take that ride with OJ, although,
Also, additionally, right, it was surprising, or at least it showed how Nicole's sister said how quickly she knew he did it.
Right.
Like right away. She was so certain. It came off as chilling almost.
I mean, for me, you have to think the amount of years that they were married and the type of brutality. I read things that said that OJ would lock her in the closet and drag her across the floor. I read something that said he locked her. They were in Las Vegas one time and he locked her in. There was a private suite for their hallway, so he kicked her out of the hotel room and left her in the hallway. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just find it hard to believe that they didn't know what was happening, and they may not have known the true extent, but they had to have known, in my opinion, something. That's a number of years for them to have been married in a number of situations. And I know that that's a difficult thing to talk about, the abuse in someone with their family. And it's sort of hard to work that line, but it's hard for me to think that they were just unaware.
I don't think they were unaware at all. I'm pretty sure they actually had conversations with her and tried to get her to leave him. I'm pretty sure they did, actually. If you listen to her sister talk, I mean, it sounds pretty obvious that she was against the whole relationship and she did everything she could.
Yeah, if there's one thing, I feel that it just speaks to the fact that it's always so much more complicated than anyone outside the situation can know when it comes to leaving an abusive relationship.
You're going to call the police, and when the police seem to be on this guy's side every time that they're involved, I mean, there's only so much you can do.
I mean, Nicole was so victimized.
And I think it reverts back to the passion thing. It's the lows and the high highs, and so it's hard. You know, you kind of put the bad situations away after a couple days or whatever, and you think, okay, we can make it work. And you have a good moment, you think everything's great, and then it's terrible and just wild.
Kind of going back a bit, circling back to the helicopter pilot that was the first to sort of spot OJ and the Bronco when they were on the run. He said something that I thought was really interesting for him to point out, that he was like, hey, Black people usually don't get to turn themselves in when they're being charged with, so there are all these things that set up that OJ really, I mean, we know that he didn't transcend his race, but in a lot of ways he did. He was given a lot of privilege that no one else would have been extended, Black or white, really, if they didn't have the celebrity attached to it. So sort of circling around to the trial and some of the stories that we heard from Carl Douglas, what did you think about the staging of OJ's house and the efforts that they made to make OJ seem more Black, for lack of a better term, for the jurors?
I mean, it's smart on the, you have 8 Black women as jurors. I think it's really smart. And he said that if they were Mexican, they would have
a sombrero and a mariachi band.
And a piñata at the top of the steps.
Wow, I missed that part. Oh my gosh. When they talked about Christopher Darden, I really kind of felt bad for Christopher Darden in this because he was in a no-win situation. Obviously, the prosecution did need someone of color on there to sort of handle the sensitive areas. It's only right. That's what inclusion is. That's what you fight for. But the fact that they brought him in so late in the game, it set him up to look like a token. And they demolished him in court.
Yeah, he got destroyed.
No, yes, I guess you could argue that he made so many of the crucial mistakes. We're going to get into that, I'm assuming, in part 4, but they do mention it. It's his role in the case was also a very large part of the People versus O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
But I think Johnny Cochran, being the experienced legal advisor that he is, he just made the point that he understood that he could influence the fact that they saw him as an Uncle Tom.
I thought it was interesting that they had a quote from OJ while he was in jail and said, the system has forced me to see things racially where I never have before. Yeah. And then there was something else he said about, if this jury convicts me, then I guess I'm guilty.
Right. Then maybe I did do it.
Yeah, maybe I did do it. I mean,
he's arrogant.
Beyond arrogant.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. Really.
He was out of his mind.
He really was.
At that point, he was out of his mind. I mean, even going back to the excuses that he gave when he cut his finger.
Yeah.
What normal person is going to give 3 different excuses on the same night? Like, that's crazy to me. If I'm going to lie, I'm going to tell the same lie at least.
Right.
Keep it consistent, right? It's just like spewing whatever comes out of his mouth in that moment.
It's like he said,
and not expecting any consequences.
Right, like, this one sounds better. Okay, I'm going to go with this, and they're not even going to pay attention to the fact that I just said that.
It wasn't even like he wasn't around ship. It's just like he's around the same guy telling different stories to other people. It's just so bizarre.
So, as we end off in episode 3, we are obviously, setting up the end of the trial of the century. We reach the moment with the gloves, and they discuss how OJ began to play to the jury. He began to play to the jury when he walked up with the gloves and sort of get his showmanship on, his stepped up acting skills. Going back for a second, something I thought was interesting was one of OJ's early roles was the movie The Affair with Elizabeth Montgomery, Bewitched. I thought, how telling was that? He was playing a cop, there was battles over their relationship and someone trying to tear them apart. It seemed that a lot of projects and things that he was involved with kind of foreshadowed his future. But back to present times, we see that OJ can't fit the gloves, and Marcia Clark, as Carl Douglas said, began to shrink in her seat. We saw moments of that if you watch The People versus OJ. Did you expect, I guess, well, did you expect? We know now. But do you really think that that moment sealed it for the jury? I know that we've heard different things, but do you think the gloves was the moment that just knocked the case away from them? Or do you think that it was much earlier with Mark Furman and the lies and the backpedaling, or just the consistent little small things that point to mishandling of the case?
I don't think you could necessarily say it was just one thing in a case like this. Certainly the gloves are a big part of it, but when you think about the statements Mark Furman made, you know, even before they get started really in court, that's already something that's like, well, obviously he didn't do it. And also take into account the climate of the time. The fact that the persona of OJ, who tried so much to separate from the fact that he was black, and yet, I forget, the Reverend, if I'm not mistaken, who said it quite simply, none of it mattered. And he just points at his hand because we still saw him just like that. I think that's the most telling, that the fact that this was an accumulation of events, evidence, and that's really what got it done. Certainly the gloves, but I think it was an accumulation, personally.
Yeah, I agree with exactly everything he just said. And also, I used the words perfect storm before. Same thing, you know, with everything going on in Los Angeles, with him being black, being a celebrity, I think it was just a perfect storm, and
it all just came together.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it wasn't one exact moment. There were a bunch of moments all put together. The legal teams, the people associated with it, the climate, the time. I think that clearly the glove moment, it was never going to be a positive for the prosecution because the glove was never going to fit.
Right. So you sort of brought up the Reverend and how it didn't matter when it comes down to it. Sort of, that's one thing about the black community. Even if there are members that have sort of shunned them, if they get in trouble or something happens, we welcome back our own, so to speak, because we know of the injustices and so forth. But I know I was noticing on social media when I was watching it that a lot of people in the community now feel played, as if the same information wasn't available to them then. They feel like, oh, we supported OJ and he did it and he didn't even care about us. And I feel that people of that time knew that because it was never a secret. OJ was always very vocal about denying his race, and what it comes down to are those other elements within the LAPD and all of the corruption. There were even things, the chokehold, which was brought up, had been banned by the time the incident happened with Rodney King, which is why they said they used the excessive force. And Daryl Gates was asked for a quote about it, and his quote was, well, they, referring to black people, react differently to it. So it just set it up that you know that as African Americans in Los Angeles, you're not going to get a fair shot no matter what. And so they welcome back OJ in. But do you think that people should feel played for supporting? You know, it's interesting. I don't know if people thought of it as supporting a murderer. More, they thought of it sort of as taking down LAPD and the corruption there and all of those type of things.
I mean, I'm not an African American, so I can't really speak for them. But from my perspective, it just looked like African Americans just wanted to beat the system one time, just for once. They didn't care that he murdered Nicole. They just wanted to beat the system. Period.
And
That's it.
was the
So much
vehicle for
injustice
it.
has happened to them, and so many times that they've seen, you know, people get away with things that they've done to their community, that they just did not care what the circumstances were. They wanted to get away with something. They wanted to beat the system, and
This
that was
was
it.
their chance to get back at it.
Yes. OJ was, in a sense, he was the perfect vehicle. He was a guy who should be innocent, as far as being the charming guy from Hertz.
Yeah.
How could he do it? That was the public persona. Obviously, it's been brought to light, you know, the reality, but I think that's what, you know, Josh is getting at. He was just that character for them to win against the system.
I mean, you grew up in Los Angeles and you're African American, so how do you...
I mean, so for me, I felt like I thought that there was a possibility that he can do it, but I believe in the justice system. I think that you have to extend those rights and foundations to the worst of us in order to protect the best of us in our society.
Right.
And I feel that they beat them on reasonable doubt. That is what they inserted in there, and essentially that's what got him off. So as we are heading into the weekend in episodes 4 and 5, are there any things that you are looking forward to being covered in the last 2 episodes of this, or things that you'd like more clarity on, or you hope they go more into detail about?
I haven't watched 4 and 5. I don't know if you guys have.
I have not.
No. Just the aftermath of the trial. You know, I'm looking forward to see like the breakdown. I don't remember too much of it, but just the aftermath between how white people reacted and how black people reacted, how the society reacted, and how we moved on as a society.
I'm curious to know, I feel like we're going to get an account. How did OJ feel about now having to accept his blackness in order to, prove he was innocent? Because it's also going along with the defense that was cooked up for him that, hey, this will get you free, but it's going to go against everything he's ever built up in his life. So getting an inside account of that's something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm just looking for new footage that
you haven't seen before.
Because there's 2 more full episodes, which is so much. Right. I'm so excited.
I've learned a lot more than I thought. Like, I didn't know a lot, especially like with race relations, all these specific cases and everything that happened in Los Angeles. I had no idea I knew they happened, but I didn't know it was like this.
The impact of it and everything. For me, I'm looking forward to seeing, because the thing is, I think what OJ didn't account for, it's like, yes, you got your freedom, but you're no longer OJ. And I think that was the hardest thing for him to deal with, and ultimately what landed him back in jail for those 33 years. So that's it for episodes 2 and 3. Make sure you check us out here on Sunday for episodes 4 and 5, the wrap up. I am Jill Munro. You can check me out on all social media. That's Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, @StilettoJill. Make sure that you download the podcast and leave us 5 stars, please.
Hey guys, I'm Gabriel Gonzalez. To discuss everything OJ Made in America and everything I'm involved with at AFTERBUZZ TV, you can catch me on Twitter @GG on TV.
I'm Josh Rodriguez. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter @Josh_Rodriguez. Don't be afraid to have a conversation with me.
And I'm Michael Rippe. You can find me all over social media @MikeRips. It's right here in the toolbar.
Smooth.
Thanks.
We like that.
See you guys next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.